My name is Lisa, and this is my story. We were just a normal family, mom, dad, and me, living in our small but cozy house. Dad worked hard to provide for us, and even though we weren't rich, we always had what we needed. I was 12 when the accident happened. It was a regular work day. Dad left for work in the morning like he always did, kissing mom goodbye and ruffling my hair. "See you tonight, kiddo," he said. Those were the last words I heard from him. Later that day, 2 police officers showed up at our door. There had been an accident at work. Dad was gone. The first few months after Dad's death were the hardest. Mom barely got out of bed some days, and I had to learn to take care of myself more than any 12-year-old should. Our neighbors helped when they could, bringing us casseroles and offering condolences, but nothing could fill the void Dad left behind. Then, about a year after Dad died, Mom met Tom at a grief support group. He was divorced and had a teenage son named Kevin. At first, Tom seemed nice enough. He'd come over for dinner, bring me chocolate bars, and try to make conversation about school. Mom started smiling again, and I guess that made me accept things faster than I should have. "Lisa, honey," Mom said one evening, holding my hands in hers, "how would you feel if Tom and Kevin came to live with us?" I remember staring at her, not knowing what to say. It felt too soon, too fast, but Mom looked so hopeful that I just nodded. They got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, and suddenly our house had 2 new residents. The first few months weren't terrible. Tom tried to be nice, and Kevin mostly kept to himself. But things started changing gradually. Every time I asked Mom to come to a parent-teacher meeting, Tom would make comments about how I was demanding too much of her time. When I needed new clothes, because my old ones were worn out, he'd complain about expenses. That's when the visits to Grandma's house started. It began innocently enough, just occasional sleepovers when Tom's family visited. Then it turned into weekend stays. "It'll be good for you to spend time with your grandmother," Mom would say, but I could see the relief in her eyes when I'd leave. The stays got longer and longer. A few days here, a week there. Sometimes 2 or even 3 weeks at a time. I started keeping extra clothes at Grandma's house because it was easier than constantly packing and unpacking. But the real breaking point came when Mom announced she was pregnant. I was 14 by then, and watching her beam with joy while sharing the news felt like a punch to the stomach. Tom stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking triumphant. That's when I realized they were building their perfect little family, and I was the loose end they needed to tie up. I still remember that night clearly. I was sitting at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows, when I heard Tom's voice coming from the kitchen. He wasn't even trying to keep his voice down. "Look, Sarah," he was saying to Mom, "we need to be realistic here. The house is too small for all of us now. With the baby coming, we barely have enough space to turn around. Lisa's practically living at your mother's house already. Maybe it's time to make that arrangement permanent." My heart stopped. Even though I'd seen it coming, hearing it said out loud was different. What hurt more was that Mom didn't object. "You're probably right," she finally said. "Mom's house is bigger, and Lisa seems happier there anyway." I ran to my room and cried into my pillow that night. The next day, I told Grandma everything. I expected her to be sad or angry, but instead, she got this determined look in her eyes. "Listen to me carefully, Lisa," she said, taking my hands in hers. "If they want you to live here, we're going to do this properly. I won't have you feeling like some unwanted package they can just drop off whenever it's convenient." Grandma called Mom that same day. I could hear her voice from the kitchen, firm and unwavering. "Sarah, if you want Lisa to live with me, we need to make this official. I want to adopt her. Lisa deserves stability, not to feel like an orphan with a living mother. I'll raise her, make sure she gets a good education, and protect her interests. But you need to agree to terminate your parental rights." I held my breath, waiting. Would Mom fight for me? Would she finally stand up to Tom and choose me? She didn't. The legal process went surprisingly quick. Mom signed away her rights without hesitation, like she was signing a grocery receipt. Grandma became my legal mother, and I moved into her house permanently. The funny thing was, it didn't feel like a big change. Grandma had been more of a mother to me in recent years than Mom ever was. After that, visits to Mom's house became rare and uncomfortable. I tried a few times, mostly out of some lingering sense of obligation. Each time, the atmosphere was suffocating. Tom would barely acknowledge my presence, his son Kevin would disappear into his room, and the baby would cry whenever I came near. Mom would hover anxiously, constantly checking the clock. The last time I visited, I brought some photos to show Mom from my school play. She barely glanced at them before getting distracted by the baby's fussing. "That's nice, honey," she said, not even looking at me. "But shouldn't you be getting back? It's getting late, and Tom's parents are coming over for dinner." I left that day and decided not to come back. What was the point? The funny thing was, Mom didn't seem to notice my absence. The phone calls, which were already rare, stopped completely. My birthday would come and go without even a text message from her. The years passed, and Mom's absence became my new normal. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about her while doing everyday things, wondering if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted her choice. But those thoughts got fewer and farther between as time went on. My high school graduation day was bright and sunny. I sat among my classmates, scanning the crowd during the ceremony. I knew Mom and Tom wouldn't be there. I hadn't even sent them an invitation, but some small, foolish part of me still hoped they might surprise me. They didn't. But Grandma was there, beaming with pride, her camera clicking away as I walked across the stage to get my diploma. When it came time for college, Grandma didn't hesitate. "Don't you worry about the money," she said when I started talking about student loans. "I've been saving for your education since the day you were born." College was like a fresh start. Nobody there knew my complicated family history, and I liked it that way. I threw myself into my studies, made new friends, and gradually built a life that didn't have space for wondering about Mom's absence. For years flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across another stage, this time with a college degree in hand. Grandma was there again, cheering louder than anyone else's family. Moving back home after graduation felt right. Grandma's house had long since become my real home, filled with warmth and acceptance I'd never found in Mom's new family. It was during one of our evening talks over tea that Grandma dropped the news. "I should probably tell you," she said carefully, stirring her tea. "Tom got a job offer in Arizona last year. Your mother sold the house and moved with the family." I sat there, cup frozen halfway to my mouth. They'd moved across the country, and Mom hadn't even thought to tell me. The news stung more than I expected it to. I forced a smile. "It's fine, really. I mean, she hasn't been part of my life for years anyway, right?" But later that night, I found myself on Facebook, scrolling through Mom's profile. Her privacy settings were loose enough that I could see her posts and photos. There they were, my half-brother, no longer a baby but a growing boy, and Kevin, now a young man. Mom looked older but happy in the photos, always surrounded by her real family. I spent hours some nights looking through those photos, watching from a digital distance as my stepbrothers grew up and my mother lived her life, a life I was no longer part of. They went on family vacations, celebrated birthdays, had backyard barbecues. Normal family stuff. Stuff we used to do before Dad died. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. At first, Grandma brushed it off as nothing serious, just a cold, she said. But then came the fever, and the weakness that made her struggle to get out of bed. I knew something was wrong when she couldn't even make it to the kitchen to bake her Sunday cookies. When she collapsed in the bathroom one morning, I called an ambulance. The next 2 weeks were a blur of hospital corridors, beeping machines, and doctors with concerned faces. I spent every possible moment by her bedside, watching her chest rise and fall, trying to pretend this wasn't as serious as it felt. One particularly bad night, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital chair, I made a decision I'd been putting off. Mom needed to know. Whatever had happened between us, this was still her mother lying in that hospital bed. I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook Messenger. "Mom, I need to tell you something important," I typed, my fingers shaking slightly. "Grandma is very sick. She's been in the hospital for 2 weeks now. The doctors are worried. I think you should come see her as soon as you can." I hit send and waited. The response came faster than I expected, but its content made my stomach turn. "Lisa, I really don't have time for this right now. We're in the middle of renovating the house, and Tommy has his school play coming up. Besides, legally speaking, she's your mother now, isn't she? You're the one who should be taking care of her." I stared at the message, reading it over and over, not quite believing what I was seeing. But there was more. "And just so we're clear, I won't be contributing a single penny to that old woman's medical bills. I have my own family to take care of." That old woman. Her own mother. I felt bile rise in my throat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I considered responding, but what was there to say? How do you respond to someone who dismisses their dying mother as that old woman? I closed the Messenger app without replying. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. After the hospital stay, Grandma came home, but she wasn't the same. I learned to be a nurse overnight, managing medications, changing bedding, cooking soft food she could keep down. Some days were better than others. On good days, she'd sit up in bed and tell me stories about when Mom was little. On bad days, she could barely open her eyes. I took leave from my new job to care for her full-time. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of medications, doctor's visits, and worried nights. Through it all, Mom never called, never messaged, never showed any interest in her mother's condition. Then came that terrible morning. I went to wake Grandma for her morning medication, but she wouldn't wake up. Her skin was cool to the touch, and in that moment, I knew. She was gone. Through my tears, I pulled out my phone one last time. Mom needed to know, even if she didn't care. "Mom, Grandma passed away this morning. The funeral will be in the coming days, please come. Whatever has happened between us, she was your mother. This is your last chance to say goodbye." I kept checking my phone every few minutes. Each notification made my heart jump, but none of them were from Mom. One day passed. Then another. I was already deep into funeral arrangements when her reply finally came. "Lisa, honestly, you need to stop with all these messages. They're becoming really annoying. I don't know how to make this any clearer. I don't care what's happening with you or Mom anymore. That chapter of my life is closed." I had to sit down as I read further. "And if this is about funeral expenses, don't even think about asking. I won't give you a single dollar. Kevin is getting married in a few months, and we have enough expenses as it is. I'm not going to let a funeral overshadow my stepson's wedding. We have caterers to pay for, venues to book, and I just ordered my mother of the groom dress." My vision blurred with tears of rage as I continued reading. "But don't worry, I'll definitely come when it's time to divide the inheritance. Make sure you keep me informed about that." The phone slipped from my hands onto the carpet. I sat there in Grandma's favorite armchair, my whole body shaking. This woman, this stranger who used to be my mother, was worried about a wedding dress while her own mother lay dead? Was already thinking about inheritance money before we'd even buried Grandma? I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally moved, something had hardened inside me. Fine. If that's how she wanted it, I'd handle everything myself. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I met with the funeral director, picked out a casket I knew Grandma would have liked, simple but elegant, just like her. I arranged for flowers, white lilies were her favorite. I contacted her friends from church, her old bridge club, even tracked down some of her former colleagues from when she used to teach. I wrote the obituary myself, my heart breaking as I tried to sum up such a wonderful life in just a few paragraphs. "Beloved mother and grandmother," I wrote, and each word felt like a testament to the truth. She had been more of a mother than my biological one could ever hope to be. A week after the funeral, I finally found the strength to start going through Grandma's documents. Her desk drawer was meticulously organized, every paper filed in labeled folders, just like she'd kept them for decades. Birth certificates, tax returns, insurance policies, everything had its place. Then I found an envelope marked "Last Will and Testament, copy." My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a document, clearly typed and bearing Grandma's signature. As I read through it, I had to sit down. Then read it again. And again. I, Margaret Eleanor Wilson, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament. The contents were clear and direct, just like Grandma herself had been. She was leaving her house and all her savings, a sum of $200,000, to me, her legally adopted daughter. But it was what came next that made me catch my breath. To my biological daughter, Sarah Miller, I leave the sum of $10,000 and my family Bible. It is my sincere hope that she will read it and finally learn the true meaning of patience, compassion, and love for one's neighbor. I sat there for a long time, letting it sink in. Then I did something impulsive. I took out my phone, snapped a clear photo of the will, and sent it to Mom. No message, no commentary. Just the image. The response was immediate. My phone started buzzing with message after message. I didn't read any of them. Then the calls started coming in. I watched Mom's name flash on my screen again and again, each time letting it go to voicemail. It felt satisfying. I was making coffee the next morning when I heard car doors slam outside. Looking through the window, I saw Mom and Tom practically running up the walkway. I took a slow sip of my coffee and waited for the inevitable pounding on the door. "Open this door right now, Lisa," Mom's voice was shrill, almost hysterical. I took my time walking to the door, unlocking it with deliberate slowness. "This is ridiculous," Mom burst in, waving her phone with the photo of the will. "This has to be fake. There's no way Mom would do this to me. I'm her real daughter." I leaned against the doorframe, studying her flushed face. "I'm surprised you rushed all the way out here. Don't you have more important things to do? A stepson's wedding to plan? Venues to book? That mother of the groom dress to alter?" Mom's face went from red to purple. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Mocking us like this?" "This is obviously a fake," Tom interrupted, trying to sound authoritative. "We need to see the official will from a notary, not some random paper you could have typed up yourself." I smiled, and I made sure it wasn't a nice smile. "How convenient that you should mention that. The official reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the notary's office." "Fine," Mom snapped, "we'll stay here tonight and—" "No, you won't," I said firmly, stepping aside and gesturing toward the door. "This is my house now, and you're not welcome to stay here. There's a Holiday Inn about 3 miles down the road. I hear they have very reasonable rates." "You can't throw us out," Mom looked genuinely shocked. "This is still my mother's house." "No, Mom, it's not. And you're right, I can't throw you out of your mother's house. But I can throw you out of my house. Which is exactly what I'm doing right now." I closed the door on their angry faces and leaned against it, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. Tomorrow would be interesting, to say the least. The notary's office was small but professional, with dark wood paneling and certificates covering the walls. Mr. Johnson sat behind his desk with an air of someone who'd seen every kind of family drama possible. Mom and Tom arrived 5 minutes late, looking like they hadn't slept well in their hotel room. "Now that everyone's here," Mr. Johnson began, adjusting his glasses, "we can proceed with the official reading of Margaret Wilson's last will and testament." I sat quietly as he went through the formal legal language, watching Mom fidget in her chair. When he reached the part about the inheritance distribution, her face went from anxious to thunderous. "This is impossible," Mom exploded before Mr. Johnson could even finish reading. "It has to be fake. She's manipulated everything." "Mrs. Miller," Mr. Johnson said calmly, "I can assure you this will is completely legitimate. I personally handled its preparation and witnessed its signing. Then you're in on it too. Mom jumped to her feet, her voice rising to a shriek. You're all conspiring against me. That little witch has turned everyone against me, just like she turned my mother against me. Mr. Johnson's expression hardened. Mrs. Miller, I must ask you to lower your voice and sit down, or I will be forced to call the police. Mom dropped back into her chair, breathing heavily, but the silence only lasted a moment. I'll sue, she hissed, glaring at me. I'll fight this with everything I have. That house belongs to me. Those savings belong to me. I'm the real daughter, the blood daughter. Mr. Johnson sighed, removing his glasses and cleaning them carefully before responding. Mrs. Miller, you are, of course, within your rights to contest this will in court. However, I feel professionally obligated to inform you that you would be wasting your time and money. What do you mean? Tom demanded. This will is ironclad. Your mother had it properly prepared, witnessed, and notarized. She was of completely sound mind when she made these decisions. Furthermore, he shuffled through some papers. We have extensive documentation showing that Lisa has been your mother's primary caregiver and closest family member for years. That doesn't matter, Mom snapped. Blood is what matters. Actually, Mrs. Miller, in legal terms, that's not correct. What matters is your mother's clear and documented wishes. And those wishes were to leave her property to Lisa, who was not only legally adopted by your mother, but also demonstrated consistent care and devotion to her throughout her final years. I cleared my throat. I also have all our Facebook messages, Mom. The ones where you refused to visit Grandma in the hospital. The ones where you called her that old woman and refused to help with her medical bills. The ones where you were too busy shopping for a wedding outfit to attend her funeral. Would you like me to show those to anyone? Mom's face went pale, then red. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said quietly. I've kept every single message. Every rejection. Every time you chose your new family over your own mother. Every time you proved Grandma right about why she made this decision. Months passed, and the threatened lawsuit never came. Every time I checked my mail, I half expected to find legal documents, but there was nothing. Eventually, I realized Mom probably couldn't afford an expensive court battle. Her silence told me more about her financial situation than she'd ever admit. But she didn't stay silent on social media. One morning, I woke up to dozens of notifications. Mom had written a long, dramatic post about how her own daughter had stolen her inheritance and betrayed her. She painted herself as the victim, complete with crying emojis and vague references to karma and divine justice. What she didn't expect was the response. Have you forgotten how you abandoned your own daughter? My father's sister commented. We all watched you push Lisa away year after year. My cousin Jack chimed in, you chose your new family over Lisa. You legally gave up your rights as her mother. You can't cry victim now. One by one, relatives spoke up, mostly Dad's side of the family, but even some of Mom's cousins. They reminded her of how she'd stopped bringing me to family gatherings. How she'd brushed off questions about me with vague excuses. How she'd missed my graduation, my college acceptance, every milestone of my life. Mom deleted the post after a few days, but the damage was done. The family had spoken, and they weren't on her side. But she wasn't done trying. The calls started coming again, this time with a different angle. Lisa, honey, she said in one voicemail, her voice sickly sweet. Tommy's starting to look at colleges, and we could really use some help with the tuition. He's your brother, after all. I deleted the message without calling back. She tried again a week later, Lisa, please. Just a small loan for Tommy's education. We're family. Finally, I picked up one of her calls, if only to end this once and for all. Family? I said before she could launch into her prepared speech. You haven't been my family since I was 14. You didn't care about my education when Grandma was paying for it. You didn't care about me at all until you needed something. Don't call me again. I hung up and blocked her number. It felt like closing the final chapter of a very long book. Now, 6 months later, I'm sitting in what is truly my house, watching the sunset through newly installed windows. The renovation isn't anything fancy, just some necessary updates Grandma had been planning anyway. The $200,000 sits mostly untouched in a high-yield savings account. I've got a good job, and between my salary and having no rent to pay, I'm doing fine. Sometimes I catch myself browsing online shopping sites or dreaming about luxury vacations, but then I hear Grandma's voice in my head, money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy security. Be smart with it, Lisa. So I'm being smart. I'm building the kind of stable, sensible life that would make Grandma proud. I have no mother now, not legally, and not in any other way that matters. But I had 14 good years with my dad, and I had a grandmother who loved me enough to become my mother when I needed one. Some people don't even get that much.